Ladies and gentlemen, Avraham Infeld.
Thank you very much, Shoshana. Ladies and gentlemen, I have in the pockets of my jacket, which I took off, two totally different speeches that I prepared for tonight. I've known for a long time, for several months, that I'm coming to do this lecture. And I've spent so much time thinking about what I want to say, that if I really have to say all that I want to say, you would spend the entire week here. So I decided for the first time in years that I'm going to write down my speech. I did it twice, and they came out two different speeches. And then I realized I can't read my notes anyway because I have very bad eyesight. So you're stuck with whatever's going to come out of my mouth tonight. I'm looking forward to maybe I'll hear something that I haven't heard before. I want to tell you first why I immediately said yes to come and to participate in this tribute. It's almost half a century since I last saw Nitsa and Robin. I have followed what they did in the Spiro Institute and in the institutions that succeeded it and that they are now doing in Spiro Arc. And I've always had a suspicion that there's a lot in common with my educational journey and the educational journey that they've taken. And in the little time that we spent together this evening, and the few words I was able to exchange with Robin, and the few things I've heard people say about what they get from this couple, I'm convinced that both of us have built what we've done in our lives on the common experience that Nitsa and I had in the 60s at an amazing institution called Ulpan Akiva in Netanya. The Ulpan was run by a phenomenal lady by the name of Shulamit Katzenelson, probably the greatest educator that I've ever met. I came to the Ulpan to work and found that Nitsa was there as the deputy director and the lead teacher, and I was hired somehow to come and to try to do informal education at the Institute. Now you have to understand what this Institute was in order to understand who this couple really are and what they've done. And I don't know of anybody, and I'm being not, not modest, and saying I don't know anybody else who could testify to how much that grounding impacted on our lives. Ulpan Akiva was an institute in which the student body was made up of the most strange, the strangest group of participants. American Jewish tourists who decided that they want to study Hebrew and came to live at the Ulpan for several months and learn Hebrew. New immigrants who were coming into Israel, living in the Netanya area, and coming every day to study at the Ulpan. People from 92 countries in the developing world, 92 different countries had delegations come to study at the Ulpan in order to be able to go to the universities and colleges in Israel so that they could study in Hebrew and take the knowledge of what they learned in these colleges back to their countries and help in the development of their countries. Arabs who were Arab Israeli citizens who were beginning to enter the civil workforce in Israel and needed to improve their Hebrew came to that Ulpan. It was an amazing, amazing connection of people. But the greatest thing about this was being at Ulpan Akiva, there was not a moment when you did not come into contact with the other. Everybody at the Ulpan was the other. There were Jews who were other kinds of Jews from me. and from us. There were Israelis who were other kinds of Israelis. There were people who had nothing to do with being either Jewish or Israeli. And they were all there at the same time. And this amazing director built an educational methodology and an educational philosophy around this unique laboratory. I want to talk about 4 particularly unique things that I know have affected what you've done, and as a result of the help that you've been in enabling this to happen. And you can't imagine the number of people that I've met who've told me about how your life changed when you met with Nietzsche, and Jewish history became so central to your life. If I was to signify what did I learn at Ulpan Akiva, I learned first of all that it was an institution that was committed to teaching the Hebrew language. But that's what it did with all the non-Jewish audiences who were there. Because when you teach a Jew Hebrew, you're not teaching a language. It's very difficult to translate the 2 terms that are used for teaching Hebrew. The one term that is used is Hora'at Hasafa Ha'ivrit, the teaching of the Hebrew language. When Nietzsche stood up in a class, which was of mixed people, to half the audience, she was teaching the Hebrew language, which was a tool that they needed in order to be able to do their work. But the other half, who were the Jews in the audience, we refer to what was the act of teaching them Hebrew as Hanchalat Halashon Ha'ivrit. Now, I've never managed to figure out how you translate the word Hanchala into English. When you teach a Jew Hebrew, you're not teaching them another language. You are providing them a key to their legacy. It's a totally different undertaking. And yet, this lady did it with such magic, the 2 things at the same time, in front of each other. You're there with the other, the different kinds of others. You are doing 2 different kinds of functions. You are transferring a knowledge of the Hebrew language, and you are helping. The word nachala in Hebrew is a legacy. You are helping people to connect to their legacy when you teach Jews the Hebrew language. And the second thing that I learned, or that we learned there, and that have definitely accompanied my life, and I'm sure Nietzsche's as well in what she's done, was the distinction between education and teaching. When you teach someone, you are judged as a teacher, but what they learn to know. The purpose of teaching is to help someone know more than they knew before. But when you educate something, it's not in order to teach somebody to know, but how do you help somebody grow? Those again are 2 different functions. Doing these things as part of an educational theory, I think we both got from Shulamit. And that is why I would like a part of my dedication of the evening to dedicate to her memory. I think we both owe her so much. I can see her standing up there and saying, oh my God, there's Nietzsche and Avraham, and they're still in education. She must be having the time of her life up there. Thank you both for what you do. I want to talk to you about my career as a Jewish educator and the things that I've found in the Jewish world, the things that have excited me, the things that have bothered me, the things that have created questions, the things that have created challenges, and what do I view as the responsibility of Jewish leadership for the future, and what are the directions we should take. So I want to take a big leap from the time that we were together in the Ulpan to another moment, some 40 years later, when I became the international president of Hillel, the best job in the Jewish world. There are more frequent flyer miles attached to the job of president of Hillel than any other job in the Jewish world. Because there are 650 Hillels in North America. There are 28 in the former Soviet Union. You have them in New Zealand and in Australia and in South Africa and in England. And throughout South America now and throughout the former Soviet Union. And if you're the president of that organization, you have to visit them all. I mean, my kids began to refer to me as Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father who art in heaven. I flew so much. But wherever I went in the Jewish world, I used to carry a chart with me. I've brought this chart with me here tonight. I want you to see, imagine it's right here. Can you see it? It's divided into 3 columns. Across the top I've written the words apples, oranges, bananas. On the second line I've written the words lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers. On the third line I've written jackets, shirts, pants. On the fourth line I've written Jew blank blank. And I have asked Jewish students throughout the Jewish world to fill in that chart, to fill in those 2 squares which were blank. What is to a Jew like an apple is to an orange? The first line were all fruits, the second line were all vegetables, the third line were all clothes. What fits in there? What goes? I have 208,000 responses from North American Jews. People, that's not a sample. That's a big number. Of the 208,000, over 206,500 wrote Jew. What do you think they wrote? Jew, Christian, Muslim. Over 206,000. I have 38,000 responses from Israeli students. Not one wrote Jew, Christian, Muslim. Every single one of the Israelis wrote in the second column, Arab. Who is their significant other? The Arab. Who are they at war with? The Arab. Who do they want to make peace with? The Arab. Who don't they want to make peace with? The Arab. It's their significant other. And then they go on to write the most ridiculous things like Englishman or American or Italian or Frenchman, making the clear statement that being a Jew is their nationalism. I have 10,000 responses from St. Petersburg, not the one in Florida, but the original one in Russia. 10,000 responses. None of them wrote either Jew, Christian, Muslim, or Arab. Every single one of them, after the word Jew, what do they write? Russian. But they live in Russia. They speak Russian. They pay taxes in Russia. Or they don't pay taxes in Russia. But they're not Russian. They're Jew. They'll say, in many of the cases, my spouse is a Russian. But they're not. Making the statement, and then they go on to write crazy things like Tartars and Kafkaz and people, things I've never heard of. Making the statement that being Jewish is an ethnic group. The most amazing is South Americans. Is there anyone in this room with a South American background? The one thing I've learned about South Americans, if you want to shut them up, all you have to do is tie their hands. A South American who can't move his hands can't talk. I get invited to open Hillel in Buenos Aires. I fly there on the private jet of Mr. Edgar Bronfman. We arrive in Buenos Aires. I go to the university, and 1,000 Jewish students in Buenos Aires come to the opening of the Hillel in Buenos Aires. 1,000 Jewish students, and I'm the guest speaker. And I don't know a word of Spanish. They said, don't worry, we'll give you a translator. They gave me a translator. She didn't understand a word of English. I said, what am I going to do? She says, you speak Hebrew, and I'll translate from Hebrew into Spanish. I said, that's fine. I spoke Hebrew. And I told 3 good jokes. And the audience laughed before she translated. I stopped the discussion. I said, what's going on here? Did you understand my Hebrew? 85% of those 1,000 Jewish students understood my Hebrew. That couldn't happen on any university in the United States of America. Not even Yeshiva University. But they understood my Hebrew. And then I said, I'm going to get them now. I said, how many of you, 1,000 students, how many of you can recite the Shema, the central prayer of our heritage? 40 out of 1,000 students. Now, I remember when the UJIA in this country used to say, we are one. We are one what? We're one hell of a mess. But this is not a joke, people. This is a profound description of a very serious crisis within the Jews' self-understanding of who they are. And for me, it was a major problem because of my own personal background. I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. I know there are a few others over here who also don't have an accent. I was born to a very Jewish family. The first language I ever wanted to learn in my life was the Hebrew language, because my parents used to tell each other secrets in Hebrew so that we would not understand. You can't have a greater motivation to learn a language than to understand the secrets going on at home. If I try to remember what were the things that my parents spoke about, I remember them cursing Hitler for what he had done to the Jews and cursing Stalin for what he was doing to the Jews and getting very excited. Soon there's going to be a Jewish state, and isn't it wonderful there is a Jewish state? Jews be proud of being Jewish, and Jews know your culture, and Jews speak your language, and Jews go live in your land. So that was the music I grew up with at home. I had a strong Jewish identity. I knew I was a member of the Jewish people. We had a relationship to a culture. We had a language of our own. Like every other tribe in South Africa where I grew up. I was living in a society of tribes. And we, the Jews, were a tribe. There were black tribes, the Xhosa, the Zulu, the Sesotho, the Matabele. There were the white tribes, the Afrikaner, the Englishman, the Litvak, and the Galiciana. These are the white tribes. I was a part of one of those tribes, the Jewish tribe. I lived with that sense of being a member of a tribe. I had a strong sense of Jewish identity. And religion had nothing to do with it. My father was an atheist. He was a Jewish atheist. He always used to say, I'm an atheist, Baruch Hashem. Being a Jew, you can't talk any other way. I never saw him in a synagogue. I'm the one who insisted that I have a bar mitzvah, not he. I demanded a bar mitzvah after I saw the gifts that my friends got. I'm not giving up on the great event. But I knew I'm a member of this thing called the Jewish people. Anybody else here from Johannesburg? Anybody went to King David's school? I was the first pupil in King David's school. I was also the only pupil in King David's school. My mother was the first headmistress. I think my father was the chairman of the board. I was the only kid in the school. At the end of 10th grade, there were 10 of us. And today it's probably the largest Jewish day school in the entire world. And it began because I turned 6. And the law said that I have to go to school. My parents created a school. I have a strong sense of Jewish identity. And I moved to Israel because my father came to me one morning and said to me, Avraham, goodbye. I just graduated high school. I said, Dad, where are you going? He said, I'm not, you are. I said, where am I going? He said to me, you're a Jewish youngster, there's a Jewish state. And I fly to Israel. I make Israel my home. A totally different environment from where I came in South Africa. But Andrew's going to have to forgive me for telling a story that he's heard, I think it's 900 times now. I arrive in Israel. My whole family in Israel live on 2 kibbutzim. Half of them live in a kibbutz in the south called Kibbutz Lahav, and the other half live in a kibbutz in the north called Kibbutz Mizrah. Kibbutz Lahav is the largest pig breeding kibbutz in Israel. And Kibbutz Mizrah is the largest producer of pork sausages in the entire Middle East. My entire family is in the pig business. And my first day in the Jewish state was the first time in my life that I ever saw a real live walking pig. I had never seen one before. I'd seen them sliced on a plate. I'd seen them hanging in a butcher shop. I had never met a real live pig. I go to Kibbutz Lahav. I'm taken around the kibbutz. I come to the big sty. I go into shock. And I turned to my Israeli cousin and I said to her, Amira, I am so surprised that the first thing I should see in Israel is a pig. And I'll never forget her response. She looks at me, that's typical Israeli, and says to me, oh, Avraham, it was so important for you to be Jewish in South Africa. But now you've come to Israel, you can stop being Jewish. You can become an Israeli. Blew my mind. I had no idea what she's talking about. I began to question my own Jewishness as a result. And didn't take very long until I became what I can best describe as a more or less traditionally practicing Jew, approximately. A guy who lives his life in an amazing love affair with things Jewish. And then I come to America and I meet this idea that Judaism is a religion. I have no idea where we get this from, and there is nothing more dangerous in the world to the Jewish people than continuing to identify the Jews as a religion. We're not. My father was the greatest Jew I ever met in my life, and a total atheist. I know that Judaism is not a religion. You know how I know? Because my father told me. And every Jew I met with in America who told me that Judaism is a religion, when I said to them, how do you know that it is a religion? I always got the answer, my father told me. So something happened to the Jewish people that created different stories that Jews told their children. And they have created for the Jewish world an unbelievable crisis. I'm 55 years in Jewish education, and I'm still deeply bothered by how are we going to cure ourselves from these different answers that our fathers gave different children about what it means to be Jewish. So I want to talk about how this happened, and then I want to talk about a theory of how to get out of the mess. How did this happen? Why are Jews so different from each other today? Was it always the case? No. Jews were never uniform about everything. But until 250 years ago, the one thing that Jews were uniform about is the answer to the question, what is a Jew? Not how to Jew, but what is a Jew? Until 250 years ago, and for approximately 2,000 years before that, anywhere you would have gone in the Jewish world, North Africa, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Yemen, Persia, Iraq, wherever you would have met a Jew and you would have asked them, what does it mean to be a Jew? You would have received the same answer. And that answer would have sounded something like this, that to be a Jew is to be a member of a particular people. This people were once upon a time slaves in Egypt. This people left Egypt, walked through a desert. This people came to a mountain. At this mountain they met with a being they called God. They signed a covenant with God. According to this covenant, we would be his people, he would be our God. He would look after us. He would give us rain in the right season. He would take us into our land. And we would keep his commandments. It was a very clear deal. That's what Jews told themselves for thousands of years. And every Jew until 250 years ago would have gone on to say, you know what happened? God kept his side of the bargain. He took us out of Egypt. He brought us into our land. He gave us rain in the right season. But we sinned. And because of our sins, we were scattered among the nations of the earth. And therefore every Jew said, it is now our responsibility to keep ourselves distinct as a people, to keep God's commandments, to hope and pray that one day he will forgive us. And if he forgives us, what will he do? He will send a Mashiach. And what will the Mashiach do? He will bring us back to Israel cheaper than Taglit birthright. But one-way ticket only. I know of no Jew until 250 years ago who understood being Jewish in any other way. I am living as a member of a people that has a covenant with God, and we are waiting for God to forgive us for our sins, because living outside of Israel is punishment. Did you know that, Robert? Punishment! Living with Nitsa can't be punishment, no. Living outside of Israel, they all said, is punishment! Trevor, I was recently in a place called Beverly Hills, California. I saw the suffering of my people. A terrible punishment. You wake up in the morning, you don't know whether you should swim in your indoor pool or your outdoor pool. It's not easy. But it's not punishment. So what happened? That something that was so clear to the Jews 250 years ago is no longer clear today. You know what happened? Modernity, French Revolution, modern liberalism, modern nationalism, individualism, all of these new ideas spread through Europe. And the poor Jew sitting in the ghetto, waiting for the Messiah, begins to see the walls of his ghetto gets lower and lower and lower, and he begins to hear sounds from outside the ghetto. And among the sounds that he hears the sound which says, Jews, stop being different. We are building a new Europe. Leave the ghetto. Become one of us. And the Jew has to respond to this invitation. Why are the Jewish people, why is the Jewish people in a mess today? Because different Jews gave different responses to the invitation to stop being different. I want to repeat that sentence because it's crucial to understanding the condition of the Jew today. The Jews living in the ghetto, waiting for a Messiah, the big M. The Messiah doesn't come, a little m comes called modernity. The Jew faces an invitation to cease being different, be invited to leave the ghetto, and he has to respond. And different Jews give different responses. I want to tell you quickly about 4 responses. There's a whole array of responses, but they all fit into these 4 categories. Response number 1, stop being different? No! I've waited for my Messiah for 3,000 years. If it takes another 3,000 years, I'll continue to wait for him. Leave me alone. I don't want to become one of you. I'm going to continue to have somewhere between 8 and 20 children, a family. I'm going to continue to wear black. I'm going to continue to live the life that my grandfathers and their grandfathers lived before them. I am not changing. As a matter of fact, if you're going to talk to me about liberalism, modernity, democracy, you frighten me. And what's the word for frighten in Hebrew? Ani chared. The creation of the Haredi world. They become fearful. They go more deeply into the ghetto. They raise even higher the walls that separate them from the others. That was reaction number 1. They're not disappearing. Anybody here been to Stanford Hill? Williamsburg, New York. Meashar in Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, Tel Aviv. They're not disappearing, they're growing from day to day. Or rather from night to night, because they have a lot of children. That was reaction number 1. Reaction number 2 was the exact opposite. I'm waiting for the Messiah for 3,000 years. He hasn't come. He's not coming. For the Israelis in the audience, they'll understand. He doesn't even call. Why should I continue to be beaten, blamed, accused of everything under the sun? Now the non-Jew says, stop being different. Why not? Why not? Maybe that's the solution to the Jewish problem. If there are no Jews, there cannot be a Jewish problem. So the loose solution to the Jewish problem is to stop being Jewish. And here begins assimilation the way we know it today. Jews simply stopping to be Jewish. It is the mirror image of becoming Haredi. The one says, I reject modernity, and the other says, I embrace modernity. Reaction number 3. In my opinion, the reaction of the majority. I know that there are scholars who disagree with me about this, and I do recognize their right to be wrong. What does reaction number 3 say? They write, I can leave the ghetto. I can wear jeans. I can become citizens of these new countries that they're building. Look what's happening. Italy's united, Germany's united, Poland's free, Europe's changing. I can become a part of this. I can speak their languages. I can go to their universities. I can go live among them. But I can't accept their God. So you know what, Mr. Non-Jew? From tomorrow morning, I'm going to become one of you, but I'm going to be different from you by religion only. And this whole concept of equating Jews to a religion is at the most 250 years old. I will become one of you. I'll even become an Englishman. I'll even let my United Synagogue look like it's the Church of England. I can't accept your religion. Maybe I can emulate some of the structures. And one of the first things that happen when you say Judaism is a religion, you create religious denominations. Where was the Reform movement 300 years ago? It didn't exist, Shoshana. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It didn't exist. Conservative Judaism did not exist. By the way, Orthodox Judaism didn't exist. The oldest denomination in the Jewish world is Reform. The Orthodox only became Orthodox after some Jews said that they were Reform. Until then, they were just Jews. Oh, you're Reform, now I'm Orthodox. And all of a sudden, you're identified by denomination. Big change in Jewish life. And the third thing that happens is that because of the coincidence of time, at approximately the same time that that is happening in Europe, the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, a new state is being created. The United States of America, that turns to Europe and says to Europe, send me your poor, send me your sick, send me your refugees. Trump, can you hear me? Send me your refugees. And out of them I will create a new people in a state that will be committed to freedom of religion. You have a state that's committed to freedom of religion, and you have Jews who are defining themselves as a religion. You do a shidduch between those two, and you give birth to the American Jewish community. First reaction was, I go deep in my ghetto. Second reaction, I assimilate. Third reaction, Judaism is a religion. Fourth reaction, many Jews tried to assimilate. Some succeeded and others did not. Why did they not succeed? Because there is a big difference between a law which says you are equal and your next door neighbor accepting you as equal. Anti-Semitism didn't stop. Probably one of the real questions for historians of the future to think about is how come that the more the Jews assimilated, so did anti-Semitism grow. I'm not accepted, I can't become one of you. And I'll tell you a story about a gentleman who was born in Budapest, grew up in Vienna, really believed in assimilation. That's the way to go. Jewish mothers, take your rights, take your children to the closest church, have them converted to Christianity. That's how we'll solve the problem of the Jewish people. You know what his name was? Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, who several years later said, I was wrong. People, you cannot overestimate how difficult it is for a Jew to say, I was wrong. But he did it. He said, I was wrong. I can't assimilate because you're not accepting me. And he produces something that we all call Zionism, but in reality is, Mr. Non-Jew, I cannot become one of you, so I'm going to become just like you. He didn't mean I'm going to become a Brit like you. I'm going to become an Italian like you, or a Frenchman like you. I'm going to become a Jew the way you are a Brit. No, you are a Brit, she's not. The way you are now, okay. When I met you more than half your life ago, you weren't. I cannot become one of you. I'm going to become just like you. You have an anthem. You have a flag. You have a state. You have an army. You control the future of your own people. That's the way I'm going to become a Jew. I'm going to have an anthem, and my anthem is going to be called Hatikva, the hope, because it speaks about the dream of the Jewish people to return to their land. And I'm going to have a flag, and it's going to be blue and white, the colors of the prayer shawl in the synagogue. By the way, he wrote Zecher Latalit, in memory of the prayer shawl. I'm going to have a blue and white flag. And I'm going to have a state, and it's going to be in the land of Israel. And I'm going to have an army, and the girls in my army are going to be much better looking than yours. And I'm going to control the future of my people. And that was the beginning of modern Zionism, which I'm going to come back to in a little while, because what modern Zionism really set out to do, and Herzl says it quite clearly, and Ben Gurion writes it quite clearly, the purpose of Zionism is to turn the Jewish people into a nation. That was its purpose. And it didn't succeed. You know why? Because some Jews continue to think it's a religion. And other Jews continue to assimilate. And other Jews remained in the ghetto. And there was a whole world of Jews who never lived in Europe, but in Persia and elsewhere, where they were not affected by these crazy changes. And they remained the Jew of the pre-modernity. So Zionism did not fulfill its claim charge, which I am going to turn the Jewish people into a nation. What Zionism did do was within 50 years create a state in which the Jewish people also give expression to their national identity. But the Jewish people have not become a nation. Baruch Hashem. Don't tell Bibi. Oh, you can tell him he didn't do too well this morning in the elections, in the pre-elections. Wow. 4 different stories of Jews still living together. Nietzsche, what are we going to do about it? No, I don't, because you know what I suggest we do? I suggest that you people start Spiro Park, and I'll start Melitz, and I'll become the first director of Taglit, and I'll go to Ran Hillel in order to remind all of these people that what we really are is a people. It is the only description of the Jew that is all-encompassing. Any other description you give to the Jew, you remove Jews from this entity. And whether you put it into these words or not, I see from what you do, and I know that is what I try to do, and we both drew on it from the lessons that we got from Shulamit and the experience in living in this Israeli community with others. Wow. I've just published a book. By the way, it is the second most important thing in my life that I've ever written. The first was writing my name on the ketubah that John gave you. I wrote a book called A Passion for a People because I am deeply concerned about the future of the Jewish people. If we keep running away from calling ourselves a people, we will continue to weaken ourselves. And yet we continue to do that. and we use language that undermines the building of peoplehood. In this book that I wrote, there's an appendix. And in this appendix, I include 2 stories. There's a couple of pages from Talmud, a couple of pages from the Bible, a couple of other pages, but there are 2 stories. 2 stories that were written by the laureate of Hebrew modern literature, Shai Agnon, the first person in Israel to ever get a Nobel Prize. And he got it for literature, despite the fact that he only taught in Hebrew, that he only wrote in Hebrew. The Nobel Prize for literature. And he wrote 2 books. And 53 years ago and 4 months ago, Nietzsche taught me those 2 stories. That's why they're in the book. The one is a story called Sipur Ha'ez. It tells the story, the fable of the goat. It talks about the mystic dream of the land of Israel. That when the Messiah comes, he's going to bring us back to this land. If any of you are pupils of Nietzsche or are going to become pupils of Nietzsche, force her to teach you those 2 stories. She changed my life by teaching me those 2 stories. Because that story, which is a master story of the land of Israel, talks about the Jewish people's dream of a Messiah coming and bringing us back to the land of Israel. And the second story, which is called Mi Oyev Lo-Ohev, from foe to friend, is the way in which we translated it that morning, from foe to friend. Tells the story of the Jewish people returning to the modern land of Israel, building a new modern state, becoming normal like other people. Of course we have enemies, but they will eventually become our friends if we stick to it and we do it. It is the story not of the Messianic dream, but the story of modern Zionism. I am blessed to have 1 Israeli citizenship and to live in 2 countries at the same time. All of them in Israel. Where am I living in Israel? Am I living in the place in which the Jewish people are applying to themselves the laws of modern nationalism of Europe? Or am I living in a place which is the fulfillment of the Messianic dream of the Jewish people to return to their land? It was not easy learning those stories from Nietzsche. I enjoyed it. But they bothered me to this very day. Because these stories are having a very difficult time living with each other. What is the Israel that you people visit? Is it a place in which the Jewish people are applying to themselves the laws of modern nationalism? Or is it the fulfillment of a dream that the Jewish people had for God returning us to our land? What is it? And these stories are in constant clash in the society in Israel. Ask any settler in the West Bank. Modern Zionism has got nothing to do with this. What's happening is Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu, the beginning of our redemption. And you know what the tragedy is? For Israel to survive, we have to find a way of living with both stories. Because if modern Zionism is applying to the Jewish people the laws of modern nationalism, We should have gone to Uganda. What an abnormal thing we did by going back to Israel. Who were these modern Zionists? What were they doing? They're revolting against everything they saw in the ghetto. They're changing. They're not building a state that talks about freedom of religion. They're building a state that talks about freedom from religion. Freedom from religion. It's possible to be a Jew without religion. They're going to build that state. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like a kid at home who gets mad at his parents, decides he's leaving home, packs his bags, throws them over his shoulder, walks to the door, slams the door, and remains inside. If he really wanted to become normal, he should have gone to Uganda. The moment he slammed that door, he remained with story number one, the Messianic story. Israel struggling. You cannot understand Israel if you don't understand those two stories, vying for political influence, for social influence, for religious influence in the land of Israel today. It's amazing. Because if we would have taken only one story, we could have built a state. We could have applied modern nationalism to the Jewish people and built a state. You wouldn't know where to build that state if it wasn't for story number one. And therefore those two stories are bound to live together. You know what that creates? Confusion, complexity, difficulty in life. One of the things that both Nietzsche and I learned from our experiences at Panakiva was if you want to really devolve in education, stop looking for simple answers. Learn to live with complexity. Be honest to yourself. Recognize that there are difficulties. Not all difficulties can be solved. We have created a younger generation of Jews in the world who are looking for simplistic answers. And we will never be happy with their responses of what's going on within the Jewish people, which has 4 different understandings of what it means to be a member of the Jewish people, and what is going on in the state of Israel, which has 2 different stories that guide it. We have to learn to be able to teach our kids the necessity and the value of complexity. I learned that from Shulamit. Living in the Upan was a complex issue. It was the most enriching experience that one could possibly have in life. I'm very glad that I shared it with you, and I wish you too all the best of many years of continuing to be involved in the teaching of the Hebrew language, but also in helping Jews find the key to their legacy, which makes things more complicated and therefore much more satisfying. Thank you very, very much for listening. J-Dov is it called, right? Shoshana has produced, was supposed to be a 10-minute film. She insisted I do it within 10 minutes. I couldn't do it in less than 11 and a half, but she agreed to put it out in 11 and a half. That story's out. It's called Avraham, Infeld on Jadov. I don't know what it is. The five-legged table, which is the theory with which I try to answer some of the issues which are raised tonight and which I simply don't have the time to continue. So it's up to you to find a way of getting the people to see this. Thank you all for listening to me. If there are questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, you're looking for the mic was here.
Okay, we have, you've got a mic there? Okay, so if anybody has got a question, we've got a little bit of time for questions. So stick your hand up and wait for the microphone to come to you. And unusually, we usually say, please make sure it's a question. But this time, if it's just a response you'd like to make, if it's a comment, as long as it's not a 14-hour drush, that's fine. So please introduce yourself and...
Avraham, it's Naomi Phillips. We talked earlier. What do you think the new election is going to produce, and are you hopeful or are you pessimistic? That's a question.
I have no idea what the results are going to be, and therefore there's no way I can be either pessimistic or optimistic. If you ask me what I hope for, I should have paid you to ask that question, because that helps me deal with something else that we all learned. I spoke a lot before about the Jewish people's relationship to the other. We are living in a world in which, for some reason, the extremes on the two sides, of the right and the left, do not enable us to be able to live honestly and compassionately and justly with the other. On the right, for some reason, what's only important is me. I'm talking about the extreme. And on the left of politics in Israel, everything else is important other than me. I learned at Ulpan Akiva that it's important to squeeze yourself in the bus of human life in order to leave room for the other. But I will never get off the bus in order to accommodate the other. I too have a place, and I have to be able to recognize the place because of the other. I want a centrist party in Israel that's going to find a way of going back and living in a deep relationship with all the others we have to live with. They're there, and they're going to continue to remain to be there. Ignoring them or making only them the issue does nothing to ensure our future. Finding that middle road is the only way possible. I know that I did not answer your question, but my late father said to me, if you have something to say, say it. If it doesn't answer the question that was asked, it's a sign they asked the wrong question. That's it. So, who?
Hello, hi. Thank you for the really fascinating talk. You mentioned the two stories, which one is the Messianic, one is the kind of more modern national one. It's interesting because the way I'm from Israel and the way I kind of see it, and I guess was raised to see it, is that actually Israel was born as a success of the second story. So the first story never happened, right? Zionism kind of said, well, we're not waiting for Messiah. Let's just do it ourselves. And it was a result of Zionism. So I think, you know, my generation, we grew up in Israel where we knew that the second story is not happening. And it will not happen. And we do know that there are some people in the Jewish world that actually disapprove Israel because of that. My question is, why, in your eyes, you still see the two stories having the same, I guess, political aspirations or significance? And do you think, are you saying this because of when you look now at the You mentioned the settlers and the right. Are you mentioning this because of these people and how they see themselves, which is different from what Israel was based on?
No. Simply, first of all, you're 100% right. The one thing I know is that Israel is the product of applying to the Jewish people the laws of modern nationalism. That's a fact. We know that. It succeeded. The state was created. I can't justify that state being in the land of Israel without that other story. The only story which connects us to that piece of land is the other story that has never come to fulfillment. I'll tell you a little secret. The greatness of the Jewish Messiah is that he has not come. So that there's always a hope. But that hope provides you direction. And it is no possible way of our being able to justify creating our Jewish state where it is without the story number one. That is why they have to find a way of living together. And where's it dangerous for them to get together? There's a major battle in Israel going around the issue of the Supreme Court of Israel. The right in Israel is doing all it can to undermine the authority of the Supreme Court, particularly the settlers movement. Because the whole concept of a court that can determine whether something is constitutional or not constitutional is a part of modern nationalism. And if what's going on in Israel has nothing to do with modern nationalism, but is only story number one, which many Israelis think it is, why should we have the Supreme Court? That is why you have to find a way of juggling and living and taking the route of complexity of finding a way of living with these two stories at the same time. My same answer applies to the fact that I didn't answer your question, but I learned that from my father.
Hi. Hello. Sorry, can you hear me? Is this on? Yes? Yeah. This is a statement, not a
I
question.
can see you, but I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Oh, okay.
There you are.
Yeah, I'll sit down again. This is a statement rather than a question. A few years ago, I did a psychosocio-linguistic study into people's attitudes towards the survival of Yiddish, and I presented it at the Spiro Arts, and Nitsa knows it. And the interesting thing that emerged from that is that people identified very strongly as Jewish, although they had a high level of non-observance, and they also identified very strongly as either English or American or whatever nation they came from, and being English speaking. And they had they identified much a greater affinity with speaking Yiddish than they did with speaking Hebrew, although that modern Hebrew, although that could have been because of who was questioned. But I just wanted to make that sort of statement in support of things that you said.
I want to try to answer the question. Not the question, the comment. What is Yiddish?
You want me to say?
It's a German Jew trying to speak German. It's a European Jew trying to speak German, but there are certain things that he cannot say in German because they don't reflect his culture. And therefore, it's mixed with Hebrew. What is Ladino? Is a Jew trying to speak Spanish and not succeeding. Because there are certain things he cannot say except in the language of his... I have to tell you a story. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of a place called Omaha, Nebraska. I was invited to give a talk in Omaha, Nebraska. I never knew there was a state called Nebraska in America, and I thought the city, Omaha, was named after my grandmother. That's what we used to call her. Turns out there was no connection. I arrived in Omaha, Nebraska on a Sunday morning. They said to me, Avraham, your lecture is only tonight. Would you like to visit our Hebrew school? I said, I'd love to. They take me to the school, which, by the way, was right next door to a synagogue and had on it religious school. I insisted they take down the sign before I walked in. I walked into a classroom. I see a teacher surrounded by 18 or 20, 10 and 11-year-old kids. And what is she doing? She's trying to teach these kids how to read a language they don't understand. There is no one else in the world who does that. There's no one else who spends $1.5 billion a year in trying to teach kids how to read a language they don't understand. It is abnormal. Human beings always learn to read a language they already understand. Not us Jews. We teach people how to read a language they don't understand. I looked at the faces of these kids in the classroom. Again, I saw the suffering of my people. I said to the teacher, why are you doing this to them? What did they do to you? She said, Avraham, you don't understand. I've only got a year or a year and a half until they bar or bat mitzvah. They have to learn to pray in Hebrew. So I called over one of the kids. I'll never forget him because of his beautiful Hebrew name, Timothy. I said, Timothy, why do you have to pray in Hebrew? Do you know what Timothy said to me? Because God doesn't understand English. Straight out. What an honest, smart answer. But that may be what we are teaching our children, that we have a stupid God. He doesn't understand English. President Bush almost understood English. God doesn't. He speaks Arabic, he understands Romanian, he even understands an Englishman talking English. So why do we teach our kids? Why do we pray in Hebrew? You know why? Because all peoples do important things in the language of their culture. Because language is not only a way of communication, language is a way of transferring culture from one generation to another. That's Hankalat Halashon. Transferring culture from one generation to another through the medium of the Hebrew language. I want to give you 3 examples. Have any of you ever heard of the phrase to fall in love? Have you heard of that phrase, to fall in love? Will somebody please explain to me what the heck falling in love is? I have no idea. I'm an expert in the field of love. Believe me, I know what love is. You rise in love. You don't fall in love. So why do we say to fall in love? And you have that statement, to fall in love, in no Buddhist language, in no African language, in no Indian language, in no Muslim language, in no Jewish language, only in non-Orthodox Christian languages. And it comes from the concept of the cardinal sin of man in Christian theology. Passion is a failing. Passion's not a failing. Passion's not a failing. Passion is what makes this world go round. How do you say to fall in love in Hebrew? Don't answer, you know the answer. I want to see if your pupils know it. Lehit ahev. Let's have a lesson in Dikduk. What binyan is lehit ahev? Hitpa'el. What's special about hitpa'el? It's reflexive. To write is lichtov, but lehit katev is to correspond. It always depends on both sides. The more you give, the more you get. It's always reflexive. It's both active and passive at the same time. Jews don't fall in love. Jews mitahev. We learn that from our language. Have any of you ever heard of the Hebrew word kadima? What's kadima? If this is kadima, that's kodim. Just listen for a moment. It's the same root. Kodim and kadima, it's the same word. Because built into our culture, there is no future without a tie to the past. How do you say charity in Hebrew? No, there's no word for charity in Hebrew. We are not a charitable people. We do tzedakah. Charity begins with a sufferer. Tzedakah begins with he or she who has the responsibility to take care of the sufferer. It comes from the Hebrew word tzedek, doing what is just, what is right. It's a different concept altogether. We learn that from our language. You know how I know? Because I had the best Hebrew teacher in the world. That's where it comes from. People who spoke Yiddish understood intrinsically that there are things that they could not say in German. So they produced a language which enabled them to retain what comes from Hebrew and mix it with German. They did that with Ladino, they did that with Mungrabit, they did that with some 30 different languages that Jews spoke around the world. That's why language is important.
Yeah. Avram, you made this comment about we are one, and you pointed at UJ. I actually think it's you forgetting it comes from the American federations, not us. But you took the mickey out of we are one, and actually isn't that the whole of your speech? Didn't you actually create the slogan? Why? I'm a bit confused.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm so glad I asked you to ask me this question. We are one. But you have to be able to finish that sentence. We are one what? People. We are one people. And we do not educate our kids to understanding that we're a people. We don't educate, we teach them that we're a religion. I'm sorry, I'm beginning my lecture. Have any of you ever heard of the phrase a converted Jew? What's a converted Jew? Somebody who did what? Became Jewish, right? Wrong. Wrong. Someone who does what you call converts to Judaism is a Jew, not a converted Jew. By Jewish law, you are not allowed to remind a convert that they're a convert. You know why? Because what they've actually done is they've joined a new people, a new family. The more we use the word conversion in order to refer to someone who joins us, the more we destroy the chance to understand what a people are. If we were to talk about adopted Jews, that's what they are. And you know how I know that? Because according to halakha, you are not, as I said, you are not allowed to remind a converted Jew that they're a convert. In the same way as we do not remind adopted children that they're adopted. Once you're part of the family, they're part of the family. But there is a phrase in Judaism called a converted Jew. You know who's a converted Jew? Somebody who converts out. He may think he's a Catholic. Have I got news for you? By Jewish law, he is a Yehudi Mumar. That's the legal term. Someone who joins us is a Jew. Someone who leaves us is a Jew. You know why? Because that's the way it works in family. That's the way it works in people. How do you join a family? You're either born into it or you're adopted by it. How do you leave a family? You don't. You may think you have, but ask the family. people, these things are very important. The more we use the terms, I'm at war with the rabbis. Don't use the word conversion. It makes, by the way, in Hebrew you can't say that. The word is mitgayer. Giyur comes from the shoresh langur. I'm going to end with this. This last Shabbat, we found multiple references in the Torah to the verb giyur, ger. You are taught, you shall love the ger. Why? Because you were a ger in the land of Egypt. When did we ever convert to becoming Egyptians? Gerut is not conversion. We were sojourners in Egypt. And we are living in a world, unfortunately today, which has probably the highest number of refugees in the history of humanity these days. We are living in a world where there are a lot of gerim. We're obliged to love the ger. Thank you all very much for listening.
Every year we have a celebration for Nitsa and Robin. It's always a joyful event. Lots of excitement, inspiration, love, warmth, affection, and a sense of unity which Nitsa and Robin created for many, many years. So I thank them very much for the event. The lecture was remarkable, very inspiring, very wise, very grounded, and just what I feel Avraham managed to express beautifully. So thank you very much.
I'm Israeli, and it was wonderful to hear a man speak so beautifully about Israel. He seems to know everything in Israel, the real politics. And he said there is no real center party. I wish there was, but there isn't. Israel is completely split, and he expressed it very well. It was wonderful to hear him.
What do you think about the Spiro events?
Yes, it is very interesting, very interesting. This woman, she has done a big job with Spiro. She taught a lot of people to speak Hebrew, which is wonderful.
What do you think of the event?
Absolutely astonishing. I was absolutely enthralled by Avraham Infeld, and I just want to say thank you so much to Robin and Nitsa for inspiring these lectures and for sharing your wisdom to all the younger generations and for so many people that have benefited from your incredible inspiration. Thank you so much.
I'm Yoji from Japan. It has been one of the best lectures I've ever had. Nitsa and Robin has been my best Hebrew teacher, and also, yeah, I really thankful for this occasion today for Avraham. Thank you.
The event is a marvelous event. The speaker is wonderful, and Nitsa is a wonderful teacher. You can hear the lecture. If you recorded the lecture, you can see what a person is, and her institution is a marvelous one. You can learn Hebrew, and you will learn a lot about Judaism and the Jewish culture. I invite everybody to join her.
I'm very proud of Saba and Safta.
Very proud of you, Saba and Safta. You're such an inspiration to all of us and everyone in the Jewish community. Hope you had a great day here, and we love you so much. Okay, bye.
What did you think of the speaker? What he said?
I thought it was really interesting because it's just different to what you like. it's different to what you grow up with, being taught that Judaism's a religion. So I think his views are very interesting and what he had to say, and I thought he was a very good speaker and really engaged the audience well.
Yeah.
So you agree?
I agree.
I come from Serbia, from the country which some people think it's very close to Russia, but it's not really. I'm amazed, and I think it's really, really very good lecture because this is universal. We are all people, never mind whether we are Jewish or not. And I think that if you respect from where you come from, and if you respect your background, you will respect everybody's background, and you will respect other people. So I think that basically this is the leitmotif of this lecture tonight, being universal and thinking of yourself as a Jewish or whether it's religion or not. I can say very similar to us. We are Serbian and we think about ourselves also as people, but we have a different religion and we always try to identify ourselves through religion, which is of course completely wrong. So I admire tonight's lecture, and I think it's really, really good. Thank you.
So how would you you finish?
Well, how I would I belong to the world.
Shalom, my name is Vanya, and I am Spiro Arc girl. I just want to say that I adore Nita and Robin, and I want to wish Robin a happy birthday. L'chaim.
Hi, a message to Robin and Nitsa from Raymond, CEO of JW3. We've just come to the end of another fantastic Spiro tribute lecture. It's such an honour for us to host this every year in recognition of your many decades serving the Jewish community. Probably no two people in the British Jewish community have done more to ensure that Jewish culture and Jewish history and the Hebrew language are embraced and loved by so many thousands of people. And it's a real honour and a pleasure to continue your legacy with JW3, and we hope to continue running the Spiro Lecture for many, many more years to come. Yishar koach to both of you.
I'm greatly privileged to have been here tonight. I'm privileged on both counts. First of all, to be here for Nita and Robin, who are my unique, wonderful friends, and not only mine. And the tribute is the least that one can do to them to come. Secondly, to have heard Mr. Infeld was a privileged number. I don't know, number one, number two, but it's together. It's been an honor, a delight, and thank you very much for the invitation. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. God bless you.
And Nita, I really meant every word I said about the impact that you've had on my life. You know it. And we both know that the impact that Shulamit had on both of us. I think that we are perhaps the only two pods that have come out, the only two peas that have come out of that pod that she created that continues the work she meant. And I'm proud to have you as a colleague.